So today on the podcast, we continue our story of Disney legend Mary Blair. In recent episodes, we explored Mary's work on It's a Small World, both the version for the New York World's Fair and an expanded version for Disneyland. We took a look at how New York advertising and children's publishing were changing in the early 1960s, basically moving away from the type of expressive illustrations that defined Mary's career. And we were starting to look at how Mary's career would evolve as a result of changing tastes in commercial illustration. Initially, Walt set up a meeting for Mary with the New York Metropolitan Opera for work on set design. But employment there involved union affiliation, which Mary did not have. And that there leads us right in to today's episode. After the Metropolitan Opera passed on Mary's services, she looked for other ways to continue her career in New York. I'd like to do a book on color for children, she explained, and I'd like to make it amusing rather than educational. But this project never found traction, in part because the visual center of children's books, like that of New York advertising, had moved away from the bright, direct illustrations that defined Mary's style. It was Walt who once again found a way to further Mary's career. His solution involved a public arts installation in Los Angeles. For the past 2 years, Jules Stein, president of the talent agency MCA, along with Walt's personal friend and architect Welton Beckett, had been developing a research institute for eye diseases and dysfunctions at UCLA. They had been joined by celebrity donors such as Alfred Hitchcock, Bob Hope, and Jack Benny. The institute would have research areas, 11 examining rooms for adult patients, and a wing for children. Walt, in addition to donating money, had volunteered to provide a mural and other artistic decorations for the children's area, so the space would be more inviting to young patients. Now that the building was almost finished, he needed to assign an artist to this project. On April 7th, Walt sent Mary a letter asking if she would be interested in working on this mural with the images based on her Small World characters. Just a note to ask that when you're next in Los Angeles, you get in touch with me, he said. I have a project I'd like to discuss with you. Jules Stein has asked for help with the Eye Institute at UCLA, and I've been thinking of maybe doing something in a ceramic mural. The mural roughly would be 10 feet high by 20 feet in length, a design created by Mary and then transferred to hundreds of square ceramic tiles. Not long after sending the letter, Walt introduced Mary to Jules Stein to discuss the specifics. As it was a clinic where patients had limited eyesight or were blind, the mural should use textured tiles with raised surfaces so the images could be interpreted and enjoyed through touch. It would be, in essence, a unique art installation that could be experienced by children with or without sight. The official theme would be the small world of children. The project intrigued Mary for a few reasons. Almost surely at the top of the list was this. Even if New York advertising was now centered on photography, this project would allow her to continue with her longtime approach to illustration, character design, and painting. Second, as luck would have it, this project would also align her work with that of an old mentor from her days at Chenard. For years now, Millard Sheets, once the founder of the California Scene Movement, had been experimenting with public murals, often arranged from non-conventional materials. He had designed an 18-foot-high tapestry featuring religious figures for Loyola University. Along with Susan Hertel, he painted a 77-foot mural for the Pomona First Federal Bank featuring scenes of early California life. Most recently, though, he had finished a tile mural called The Four Elements for the Interpace Corporation's headquarters in Parsippany, New Jersey. A massive image, 35 by 35 feet, offering a flowing vision of earth, water, air, and fire arranged from over 1,000 one-foot square tiles pieced together. Even before meeting with Stein, Mary was aware of Sheets' installation in New Jersey, about 40 miles from her house. Almost surely Lee was aware of it as well. From looking at Sheets' work, Mary could see how the mural for Jules Stein might incorporate many artistic elements that she had explored for years, not only in terms of the subjects and color combinations, but also the mural's finish. The glazing process, she explained, would create, well, an impression of wet watercolors with their richness and glistening qualities. To get this effect, she would work with the same ceramic studio with whom Sheets had worked in recent years, the Interpace Franciscan Ceramic Studio, located only a few miles from the WED facility in Glendale. Without doubt, the importance of this project was not lost on Lee. With the new mural, Mary was being elevated as a person now in the same realm of Lee's idol from art school, Millard Sheets. Beyond this, there was one more element that would be difficult for Lee to absorb. Walt wasn't only commissioning a mural, he assigned one of his longtime producers, Harry Title, to make a 20-minute educational documentary about its creation, with about half of it focused on Mary's work, the other parts on the clinic and the ceramic studio. Not only did Mary have a commission to create a significant public work, Walt would preserve her thoughts and efforts on film. Now that her kids were older, Mary reestablished her bicoastal life, with one set of friends in New York, the other in California. When she flew to California, Disney typically put her up at a hotel just down the street from the studio, the Tolucan. Occasionally she had dinner with Walt, but more often she had dinner with friends. When she was out here from New York, Alice Davis explained, she would come and have dinner at least twice. Mary would also visit with Rolly Crump and Hazel George. By this point, Rolly could decode her social life, as he now understood some private stresses inside of it. As long as she was with Disney people, Rolly said, there was a connect. She had a different personality. When she wasn't with Disney artists, she was a little quieter. Once Mary understood the assignment and met with Jules Stein and his wife, she started in on her work. Drawing on earlier designs, she sketched images of children, again in international costumes, that would fit the large reception space of the children's wing. The beginning of a design is always a difficult time for me, she said. Usually I begin by making little doodle sketches. Many of these doodle sketches she discarded, but others she enlarged onto sheets of tracing paper, which she then thumbtacked to a corkboard wall in her studio, where she could move their positions as she estimated each figure's placement in the final mural. The design of the figures was extremely close to that of It's a Small World, with two exceptions. First, the characters were presented more as simplified caricature, as though these figures had been drawn or at least envisioned by children. And second, the costumes. For Small World, Mary and Alice Davis had created costuming that expressed nuanced identities of people throughout the world. Here, as Mary explained, she chose costumes that would be, easily recognizable by our audience, the children. Once she had settled on the illustrations, she painted each figure to get a feel for how color would work in the mural. Then she brushed out multiple studies onto pieces of watercolor paper, experimenting with how to arrange elements for the mural. In filling out the mural beyond the images of children, Mary reused design motifs from the Disney attraction. Basic shapes such as a triangle and circle, arranged to suggest architectural icons of the world, a repeated pattern of flowers, and a half-seen crescent moon high in one corner. In one of her later mural designs, she positioned the sun as a golden circle defining the upper center of the mural, a sun that would also double as a clock face so patients would know how much time they had before their appointment. The general plan was that the mural, once turned into tiles, would cover a full wall of the clinic's waiting area. At the base of the mural would be a carpeted area for young patients to play. This arrangement would create a living tableau in which Mary's international children on the wall eased down to a space where real children, some of whom would have come from around the world, played together on the floor. She eventually narrowed her mural designs to two concepts, which Walt considered with Jules Stein and his wife Doris. Well, they were happy with them, Walt would later say, and selected the one with the orange clock in the center. Then he added, actually, they were really excited and tremendously pleased. Mary did much of her work for the mural in California where her efforts were appreciated and praised. The problems in her life at this time mostly circled her house back in New York. By the mid-1960s, Lee held two official roles at his company. He was company president and director of animation, mostly overseeing TV commercials, title sequences, and documentary inserts that involved hand-drawn cell animation and stop motion. Live-action efforts were directed by his Navy partner Bernie Rubin and by Peter Teitla, the son of a Disney animator. Outside of his company, Lee also worked with the Film Producers Association of New York. It was a way to promote the film industry as a whole and ensure that his company had information regarding future production trends. It was also a way, once again, to elevate his name in the world of business because even in his mid-50s, he still felt the soft but seductive drumbeat of family expectations. In 1966, as Mary worked on the mural, Lee saw a new way to advance the interest of his company and also of the industry as a whole. Newly elected mayor of New York, John Lindsay, a centrist Republican, had run on a platform to create 200,000 new jobs in the next 4 years. There were many ways to increase employment in New York, largely by expanding industry, but Lee and other producers understood that one quick way to elevate employment was to lower barriers to Hollywood studios who wanted to shoot in the city. Studios that would outsource much of their work to local companies, technicians, and craftspeople. For years, Hollywood looked at New York as a difficult location, which was one reason why many West Coast studios maintained backlot areas that resembled the Big Apple. From Hollywood's perspective, there were two problems: the endless permitting process and unions looking to increase their cut. Lee and his friend Harold Klein, who represented both local producers and trade unions, sought to change this with the help of the new mayor. Well, all of the California studios were afraid of grift in New York, Lee explained. Anybody that had anything to do with it would shake them down here. So I got Harold Klein and myself and we went down. John Lindsay was mayor at the time, and we said, you are just driving thousands, millions of dollars of work away from this town by letting people do that. So he established the mayor's office for radio, film, and TV. As a result of these conversations, the mayor set up a working group to advance TV and film production in New York. The office was charged with creating a one-stop permit system for film companies, eliminating separate fees charged by different city bodies, and creating a police unit to work with film crews to help studios avoid problems, particularly with unions, that could slow production. Lee would later claim that camera operators, technicians, and craftspeople primarily benefited from the new policies, not so much his company. Still, his work on the issue further centered him in circles of politics and commerce and away from his family and his own art, though clearly he yearned to create his own canvases and watercolors and also to find deeper connections with people, even if those were outside of the house. Despite success in business, Lee occasionally came home angry, upset that the one thing he wanted to be, an artist, was so far outside his daily life that it was darkly humorous. He was conscious of the divide between his aspirations and his career, but unable to solve this problem. "I have led 2 lives," he said, "one in the fine arts field, the other in the motion picture field, which I had to do to survive, to live, to get married." To feel like an artist, Lee continued to draw storyboards for commercials and other animated projects, even though he was the company president. When he had time, he painted, but he was far from that youthful goal he'd set for himself, to become a painter whose works were exhibited in galleries and museums, a painter whose career should have risen up from the early success he had had in California. He saw the accomplishments of his wife, including this new mural, a mural that was starting to put her on the same artistic level as his mentor Millard Sheets. The pressures from work, his desire to be an artist, was sometimes too much for him. "Well, he would get violent," his son Kevin said. The focus of his outbursts were mostly objects, a way to vent his frustration. "He threw things when he was upset," Kevin added. A story that Disney artist John Hench later related about these years involved one of Lee's affairs. When Mary came home early from a work trip, she found Lee in his studio with a naked model on a podium as he sketched her. Lee and the model both appeared surprised at her early arrival, but Mary, simply taking in the scene, coolly looked from the model to Lee, then back to the model. Lifting her eyebrows in an expression of open displeasure, she said to the woman, "I'd like to have you pose for me sometime." Then she walked away. During these times, a distance opened between Mary and Lee. They each had their own worlds, places where they were experts. The family issues caused by Lee, who was already a heavy drinker, now led Mary to take an extra drink as well. Despite these concerns, as one of their sons explained, she never wanted to get divorced, but at times she would stop referring to him as Lee and start referring to him as that man. Their marriage became a collection of good and bad days, with the bad days now on the rise. The good days often involved sailing or other outings. The bad days were when Lee arrived home from work smelling of booze and desperation. The worst moment occurred at a family dinner. At this meal, Kevin refused to eat his salad. For Lee, who had been a model son, it was unthinkable for a child to repeatedly disobey a reasonable request from a parent. All Lee wanted his son to do was to eat healthy greens to help the boy as he grew. But Kevin refused. The subject of the fight was the uneaten salad, but clearly the real issues were much deeper, likely Kevin's insistence on removing himself from his father's influence. When it was clear that Kevin would not change his mind, Lee hit him. In one account, the blow involved a chair. Stunned, Kevin, still a small, thin, early teenager, stood and faced his father. Then he curled his fingers into a tight fist. "I turned around and I hit him," he explained. Kevin would also say that this one night was not typical, a night far worse than all of the others. It was a sign of many things, that the stress in Lee's life was beginning to collapse in on him, that there were now other problems boiling up within the family, partially stemming from Lee's ongoing absences, that Mary's kids were now at the point where they could, at least in part, read the marital terrain between their parents with some depth. Kevin recalled going to the hospital following that incident, with Mary deeply upset. It's now unclear if Kevin had injuries that required immediate medical attention, or if Mary used the hospital visit to publicly embarrass Lee to ensure that something like this never happened again. From the interview records that remain, with minimal physical damage, neither Lee nor Kevin being particularly strong, it seems the latter is more likely. This likely was Mary's way of managing a terrible situation. Mary never talked about this incident outside the family. Neither did Lee, but it defines a bottoming out for the Blairs, one in which Lee was, in some small way, forced to acknowledge the damage he was bringing into his home. There's no clear way to know with surety if Lee's anger, outburst, and affairs ended after this night, but in terms of the interview record, stories about Lee's outbursts and affairs end around this time. It appears that his outward-facing anger was transformed into an inward-facing depression, a series of dark, reflective moods that were increasingly private. One of the unusual elements in the interview record is the absence of Donovan in many of these family stories. He's simply not mentioned, which means that, as the older boy and a recent graduate from Great Neck High School, he simply wasn't home, likely choosing to spend time away from the problems that simmered there. Like his parents, Donovan aspired to be an artist. He surely saw that art was a reliable refuge for Mary and a constant source of ambition for Lee. Inside the Blair home, the creation of meaningful art, either for personal expression or commercial success, was one of the most important activities a person could engage. Donovan was extremely bright. His cousin recalled that he had the IQ of a genius, tested 160 or something. Donovan had some of his parents' talent. He had ambition, and at school, he had focused that ambition on painting and drawing. If Mary struggled to understand the intricacies of aerospace engineering, which were the center of Kevin's interest, she easily understood Donovan's, even if Donovan could be private and a bit of an outsider. Alice Davis explained, Mary was very happy at one point because Donovan showed great skill. During these months, Donovan spent time with other New York teenagers interested in art and the counterculture. This was the crowd who would have suggested that Small World didn't celebrate the idealized joy of childhood so much as it created a false vision of life to paper over how children were mistreated in various countries throughout the world. It's unlikely that Donovan ever brought any of these perspectives home, likely because he remained close with Mary. But in the mid-1960s, when teenagers tended to see their generation as unique and independent, full of political skepticism and arranged as a force for social change, a set of problems began to swirl around Donovan. Problems that were hidden beneath the surface of his good manners and polite voice. Raleigh Crump would later comment that Donovan was very well behaved, but also on the edge of getting into trouble. For most of 1966, Mary's greatest source of professional meaning came from the work she created for Disney. She had moments of nostalgia for the recent past as she could see that Small World would likely be a career high point. "It was the most interesting job I've ever had," she said. "I guess you could call it theater in the round, but it's really much more." But now that her work on it was finished, she set her attention on the wall mural for the Jules Stein Clinic. She worked in an empty studio space with an assistant. Using an overhead projector, she enlarged her mural concept onto a wall so she could outline the finished image on large strips of paper taped together to create the full-sized vision. Enlarging a small sketch onto such a great size is much more than a mechanical process, Mary explained. There's a great difference between a 20-inch design and a 20-foot one. She needed to adjust lines and decorative elements so that her design would appear inviting and whimsical as a mural roughly 10 feet high. Some design elements she drew directly onto the paper. either standing on the ground or on a ladder. The more intricate child figures she drew on separate pieces of paper and then taped them onto the full-size design. Outside of the studio, she worked with experts at the Franciscan Studio in Glendale, who would create unique paints and glazes to perfectly match the colors she'd selected. Paints with early pigment blends were fired onto test tiles, then compared to the tones in Mary's original painting. If the color didn't match, the Franciscan Studio revised the paint formula, ensuring that the finished tiles would look just like one of Mary's watercolors. As with Small World, Walt once again placed Mary into a position where she worked not only as a concept artist, but as an art director and project manager. Very few people at Disney held this level of responsibility and autonomy, aside from perhaps animator Ward Kimball, who produced his own episodes and short films, largely for Walt's weekly TV series. As grateful as Mary was for this opportunity, she could also see that Walt, her great protector, was starting to look older. When he filmed introductions for his TV show, a makeup artist dyed his hair, removing years from his appearance. But a few weeks after filming, the dye faded to reveal deep strands of silver. His eyes looked tired. He moved slower as one leg pained him now. As a lifelong smoker, his cough was suddenly worse. Walt and studio representatives put all these symptoms down to an old polo injury he had sustained in the early 1930s. He was planning to have surgery for this. Like most, Mary didn't question why an old polo injury would cause the range of symptoms that she and everyone else observed in him. For many at Disney, it was as though Walt was a figure outside the damaging influence of time. Walt was 65 years old, but at times when the dye faded from his hair, he appeared many years older. Still, the force of his personality combined with the graciousness of his demeanor convinced those around him that little was wrong with him that rest and a surgical procedure couldn't fix. During these weeks, Mary focused on the Eye Clinic mural, an installation that would take the stylized children that she had previously used in film, publishing, advertising, and It's a Small World into a new public space, allowing designs that she had originated for Disney as a commercial endeavor to return her in some partial way back to her first love, the realm of the fine arts. In closing up our episode today, I need to tell you a little about what's going on in my regular life. We have 3 dogs, and they are always out here as I write and record each week. They are very well behaved and know that office time is the time to relax. Over the years, a few listeners with very sharp ears have written in to ask what the occasional faint jingling sound was in the background. That's just them shifting their resting position. But about a month ago, our oldest dog started to show some discomfort and an occasional breathing irregularity. Our vet initially thought this was a dental issue. Perhaps a damaged tooth had affected the sinus cavity. But after surgery, it turned out to be something far more serious. Our dog, his name is Bear, had a CT scan earlier this week, and we learned that he has an aggressive case of cancer hidden at the back of his nasal cavity. We were told he likely has a couple of months and that he would need care from us. Right now, he looks like his normal self, though he has slowed down in the last 2 or 3 years because of age. But I wanted to tell everyone here about this. I want to make sure that Bear is comfortable and that he feels very loved in the time he has left with us and also gets all the care he needs. Because of this, our podcast might have an erratic posting schedule during the next couple of months. We will still have episodes, but they might not go up on Sunday nights as has been our habit for many years. or the episodes might be slightly shorter, or there might be a gap between a few of them. I want everyone to know that some changes in the next couple of months may be necessary, but only temporary, as I also care about all of the topics we explore here each week, and I value everyone who tunes in to hear these stories. If you'd like to support our podcast by becoming a subscriber, you can do so over on Bandcamp at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. Usually, this is the part of the episode where I say I will see you next Sunday. And right now, I fully expect to see you next Sunday, but also I want you to keep in mind that there may be some reasons in the next couple of months where our posting schedule is a bit different than it has been over many years. So until next time, hopefully next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.